McDonnell Hornet is by no means the most expensive plane in the Navy inventory. Rather, it represents an attempt to find a high-performance, value-for-money solution to two very different Navy requirements. The F-18 brilliantly succeeds in filling those needs. But, good as the design is, the plane almost never happened. In many ways, its story can be traced back to the early 1950s. This was at the time when the Cold War had been a reality for several years. Another reality that the US was coming to terms with was that the Russians were no longer lagging behind America in aeronautical design. In fact, they had achieved remarkable developments in the post-war years and were able to produce a series of bomber designs which shocked the NATO allies every bit as much as their MiG fighters had done. This is the Russian Tu-16, NATO named the Badger, an extremely advanced aircraft for its time, powered by only two engines that were the largest and most powerful jets of their day. The Badger's full-swept wing, high speed and substantial bomb load made it a major threat, but its limited range would have confined it to use only in the event of a European conflict. No such constraint applied to the Tu-95, the Bear. This design was to prove an excellent investment for the Soviet military, its sole user for over 30 years. Its jet-driven propeller provided fuel economy which enhanced its range to reach North America from Russian bases. But it was the M4 Bison, whose existence was discovered in the late 1950s, which constituted far more of a strategic threat. The Bison combined the speed of a pure jet with the range of the Bear. Unknown to the Western planners, the M4 was not built in the large numbers of its propeller-driven counterpart, though their concern at its capabilities were well-founded. A fast, high-flying target like the Bison called for a different type of weapon than had previously been used in fighters, air-to-air rockets. Non-guided rockets were fitted to the fighters of the day, which were designed for high speed and high climb, with some also designed to offer particularly long range and all-weather capability. Thus, the early Super Sabres, Delta Daggers and some Voodoos, together with Northrop's Scorpions, all in their time used basic rocketry, dedicated to the purpose of responding to the perceived threat from the Russians. If conflict had ever come, large numbers of jet fighters from Air Defense Command would have used thousands of rockets to provide a wall of destruction before the new Russian designs. As technology progressed, so did rocketry, and the mass of simple, unguided weapons gave way to a limited number of much larger and more sophisticated concepts. Missiles were now guided, and some even contained nuclear warheads, to be fired far ahead of the launching fighter to create a nuclear barrier, far worse than conventional rockets. The aircraft that carried this technology had to be fast and high-flying, but its purpose of intercepting the bombers meant that it would not necessarily be light and maneuverable, and certainly that it would not be a fighter in the traditional terms that would have been understood even a decade before. This commitment to producing an aircraft that would be known as an interceptor rather than a dogfighter was to leave the Air Force deficient when the conflict in Southeast Asia arose. Delta Daggers were ideally suited to protecting American airstrips and other installations from North Vietnamese bombers. But during the entire campaign, no such attack took place, and the 102s were suited to no other purpose. Vietnam was a different war, and the aircraft that the US Air Force would confront were nearer to the older definition of fighters, highly mobile, adequately fast, and economic. In some ways, they were almost primitive. However, against Western technology, North Vietnamese MiGs gave a very good account of themselves in a dogfight scenario. The most successful US fighter in the conflict was the F-4 Phantom. Very fast and extremely powerful, it used several levels of guided missilery and a second crew member to assist in their firing, in a combination that was to prove the best the US could offer against the agile MiGs. But the F-4 was originally designed as a Navy interceptor, using missilery to deal with enemy planes, rather than being able to take them on as a true dogfighter itself. Even before the conclusion of the Southeast Asian War, the Navy, in light of the revealed limitations of the F-4 in fighter-to-fighter combat, was looking for a more versatile interceptor, which it found in the Grumman F-14 Tomcat. With the Tomcat, no expense was spared. Carrier space is limited, and it was thought it must be dedicated to the best money could buy, which undoubtedly the Tomcat was. It used variable sweep wings to provide flexible combinations, and despite its size, it was extremely agile. Using the Phoenix missile, it achieved a range the Air Force had only been able to contemplate for many years. Because of the Tomcat's flexible design, it was able to carry the same type of weaponry the Phantoms used over Vietnam, with the significant inclusion of a cannon for close encounters and dogfighting. Where the Navy went for a multi-purpose replacement for the F-4, the US Air Force decided to build a new, dedicated air superiority fighter. For this role, McDonnell Douglas developed the F-15 Eagle. With a more defined mission, the Eagle didn't require the second crew member of the Tomcat or a variable sweep wing, but had to combine enormous speed and range with agility and a heavy firepower. The F-15 Eagle is today still probably the best single fighter concept available anywhere. Fighter design is as much a question of philosophy as it is technology, and Russian thinking had taken another tack entirely. Their defense hinged upon large numbers of clever, if perhaps basic planes like the MiG-21. This aircraft had earned great credit over Vietnam, and still to this day, supplied in quantity, provides value for money as a fighter. Opposing this was a US philosophy of striving to achieve the highest quality. But the sheer numbers of Russian fighters caused the US to think about its designs again. A further influence on US thinking in the early 70s was that many of the supporting NATO air forces were flying the Lockheed 104 Starfighter, a plane that had proven very effective but was now fast nearing retirement.